Morning with Al Franken, set to make a major announcement on the Senate floor, perhaps as early as 1 hour from now. Amid new sexual misconduct allegations, 3/4 of Franken's Democratic colleagues are now calling for him to resign. Interestingly, most Republicans sitting this one out. I got a great team here to help me break it all down because, trust me, I got questions today. But I want to start with MSNBC's Garrett Haake, live on the Hill. Garrett, do we know for sure what Franken will say? Could he throw a curveball here?
He could, Stephanie, although it seems unlikely. In fact, last night, his office used Twitter to push back pretty hard at the idea that he had made any specific decision about what he was going to do today, saying only that he would speak on this today and that he was still in conversations with his family and his colleagues about figuring out the pathway forward. But also make no mistake, it could be very, very difficult if he were to decide to try to hang on to this seat, having completely lost the support of his caucus. We're up to, I think, 35 Democratic senators who have now publicly called on Franken to step aside. Remember, there are 3 Democratic senators on the Ethics Committee who are prevented by rule of that committee from saying anything about Franken because there's an investigation there. So if you pump that up to 38, you're at 80% of the Democratic caucus essentially saying it's time for Al Franken to move on. And this started yesterday with a group of Democratic women senators who just felt like the mounting accusations, the number, the scope, and the pattern was too much. And it was time for Franken to step aside. And it started with Kristen Gillibrand yesterday. Take a listen.
Enough is enough. I think when we start having to talk about the differences between sexual assault and sexual harassment and unwanted groping, you are having the wrong conversation. You need to draw a line in the sand and say none of it is okay. I do not feel that he should continue to serve.
So that's the situation that Al Franken is walking into today. Stephanie, whether he decides to resign in this floor speech or not today, certainly the most important and, again, potentially the last speech of his political career we're expecting today.
All right, I want to bring my panel in. Maya Harris, an MSNBC political and legal contributor, Matt Welsh, editor-at-large for Reason, a libertarian monthly magazine, and Mike Pesca, host of the Slate's Daily podcast. Maya, I got to start with you. Is this the end of the road for Al Franken? Does he have a choice here?
I don't think he has a choice. You got 35 Democrats. Your own caucus is not standing by you here and saying it's time for you to resign. I think that, he has to go. And I think that this is an example of the fact that we ought to be holding elected officials to the highest standards when it comes to issues like this, that they're in positions of public trust. And if you violate the public trust, there are consequences for that, and there has to be accountability. And I think that that's what you saw, senator after senator come out yesterday and stand up for, starting with the women who stood up and said that enough is enough. It's time to resign.
Okay, but is this not an odd tipping point? We had at least half a dozen women accuse Franken of inappropriate behavior. Then, on the day that the 7th and 8th women come out, the dam breaks. Talk me through this timing.
Well, there's some timing, which is that you needed Al Franken on the tax vote, which was razor thin, and then you've got the special election in Alabama. There were a lot of.
This isn't about ethics; it's about politics.
Of course it is. This is where it's politics. It's about politics. I know it's hard to believe that It's a Wonderful Life isn't a true story and these kind of things. Politics is kind of a dirty game here, and the timing here is completely opportunistic. It wasn't a spontaneous demonstration yesterday. It was coordinated in advance. Republicans have been spending, every time Roy Moore went up in the polls, they would be on Twitter saying, thanks, Al Franken. And Democrats were reading this. They wanted to be able to move at least some votes in Alabama and to make daylight in between the two parties and how they treat these kinds of scandals.
Can I just say that, but even if it is political to a degree, that still means something, because once you decide that something's not good for your politics, that is an indication to some degree that the culture is shifting and that power is shifting, and that you actually have to do something about it.
Politics,
and I think that's important.
Well, hold on, though. I want to share what Dick Durbin said. This is the #2 Democrat in the Senate, and he was talking through the Al Franken case, because it's not just about politics, it's about process. Watch.
Let's have a hearing, an investigation. Let's let this it really reach whatever conclusion it's going to reach, but through a due process. I think we were trying to accumulate the evidence and weigh the charges and decide their credibility. I think that's a natural and a fair reaction. But the latest disclosures, I think, have reached a tipping point.
But why? I mean, the ethics committee, the hearings, isn't that what the democratic process is about? Earlier today, I saw Willie Geist on Morning Joe ask Jackie Spear that question, what about the ethics committee? And she didn't have an answer.
Yeah, but the ethics committee wasn't constituted to make this sort of determination. Also, you have these accusers accusing him and Franken not really denying it. So what's an ethics committee going to do? Find fact? You know, politics, I guess we use it only pejoratively. But politics is also, every time you adhere to a norm, it's politics. Every time you deliver for your constituents, it's politics. Every time you take a stand that might be considered, that might reflect well on you for political gain, but also for actual moral gain, that's also politics. So yeah, of course there's a political element to this. You know, the fact that it was coordinated, would a disorganized effort have been better? It was a coordinated effort to get Al Franken out of the Senate. I have ambivalent feelings about this, but if one party wants to say, look, there's going to be a party that countenances sexual harassment, and there's going to be a party that doesn't, and if what we have to sacrifice is Al Franken to brand ourselves as the party that doesn't, and even if that has political benefit, that's what we want to do.
Then is this not the year of the ultimate age of hypocrisy? Lisa Murkowski, a Republican, to come out and call for Al Franken to resign? Does Lisa Murkowski not remember that our president of the United States, Donald Trump, who she stands behind, has more accusers than Al Franken and who have accused him of worse? So how does Lisa Murkowski stand up and say, I think Al Franken needs to step down, and stand silent when it comes to our president, our Republican president? And by the way, every other female Republican.
Not just her, but Mitch McConnell, too. He released a statement yesterday. Franken needs to resign. I mean, just bookmark that one and watch McConnell's attitudes, not just towards Donald Trump, but towards Roy Moore. Like, he wasn't going to seat Roy Moore. He was going to lead the...
Though Mitch McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao, says on the sexual harassment front, we need to move on.
But, you know, I mean, hypocrisy is working for them. And the other thing that's working for them is that their approach to their own situations, when it happens in their own house, is to deny, degrade, and to dig in. That's the other thing that's working for them. They deny that it happened. We saw this with Roy Moore. We saw it with, Trump, to dig in, to say, I'm not going to resign. And, ultimately, it's working for them. They've been elected to office. Now, we don't know whether it's going to work in Alabama, and I think Alabama is going to be the next test.
And Donald Trump is the most unpopular president in modern recording.
Well, that's right. I think 2017, what's going to happen next week is going to be an indicator, and I think we have to see what's going to happen in 2018. Because I do think that the politics and the culture is shifting on this. And we saw, January 21st, all the women who poured out into the streets. We saw a month ago today, November 7th, in the election, all the women who turned out in the election, the big gender gap that we saw in the vote, all of the women who are running for office and getting elected to office. And so I think that we're going to see the results of this over time, even though up to now for Republicans this has worked.
And we can talk all day long about how unpopular President Trump is. He is a political Svengali, an unpopular, completely unqualified, morally reprehensible person became president of the United States. And though I cannot believe lightning's going to strike me, I'm saying this. I want to share what Laura Ingraham had to say. Watch this. I can't even believe I'm playing this.
They've come down with a sudden case of feverish morality, but what it really is nothing more than a political calculation by the Dems. It sets the precedent for the Democrats to try to drive Roy Moore from office should he win the Alabama Senate race. And two, this is the next step in the quest to impeach President Trump.
I feel like lightning is going to strike me. Does Laura Ingraham have a point here? Democrats are going, Al Franken could be the sacrificial lamb and say, look at the moral high ground we found. Doesn't it take one simple moment for Republicans to turn around and say, reminder, you stood behind Bill Clinton for 40 years?
Well, I think the accusation is they're trying to grab the moral high ground, but I think they did it. I mean, 20 years ago is 20 years ago, and there's nothing you could do about Bill Clinton now. But you have Farenthold there, a Republican who's in the House of Representatives.
Yes.
You have the president. What are you Republicans doing about it? The people of Alabama can vote, and that's a democratic process. But now you have the exact same situation. There's no analogous situation to a president who served 3 terms ago, and now evidence is coming out. You have an exactly analogous situation there in the House. You're doing nothing about it. So let the people decide what the parties stand for.
Last point, though, that is a great point. What do Republicans do about Farenthold? You could say, Roy Moore, let's let the people of Alabama vote. What do they do about Farenthold?
I mean, something. I mean, the thing is that,
technically speaking,
you know, you thought there couldn't be a new low, but the president of the United States of America and the Republican Party has gotten behind a pedophile in Alabama. So, I mean, I don't think there was a lower ground for the Republicans to go on this. And so let's wait and see. Ryan has not, to this point, suggested that he's going to call for Fahrenholtz's resignation, even though he's had the allegations he's had. He's had an $84,000 settlement, 3 times the amount of the settlement that people keep pointing to for John Conyers. Let's wait and see, but I think we're going to be waiting for a long time.
Fahrenholtz expendable in a way that Trump and Moore aren't.
All right, we got breaking news now. Violence breaking out in the West Bank just one day after President